Morning, everybody. It's so great to be able to still have worship in this way, although it is very, very strange to be sitting here in the sanctuary knowing that we're going to have it empty for Sunday morning once again. But we're continuing to pray and hope that this coronavirus will soon pass and we can get back to our normal lives. Before I start my sermon, I did want to say Mark hasn't put up a new announcement video this week because frankly nothing's changed. Everything's kind of at a standstill right now, so he didn't feel the need to put a new one up. And there is really only one other announcement for this week specifically that I need to make, and it is that this week, yesterday, was Victor and Terry's 39th wedding anniversary. And so Victor called and said that he wanted to let everybody know that he thanks God for such an amazing wife and life partner. So we congratulate both of you, and we're glad to have some good news, and we pray there's many more years together for both of you. This week is a special holiday that's near and dear to my heart, and one that I'm really hoping the virus doesn't put as big a damper on as it has some of the other things. And that's April Fool's Day. And so this morning I'd like to share a story of one of the better April Fool's Day pranks that I can remember being a part of. Luckily I wasn't on the bad end of it, but the friend of mine who was took it in stride, and it's a great story for all of us. And so hopefully you all get as good a laugh out of it as we still do. And so our roommate Dan is the one who got pranked, and we decided that we wanted to have him believe that his car had been hit in the parking lot. We had a roommate that was really good at Photoshop, and what better way to use that talent than to pull a prank on our roommate for April Fool's Day. So we took a picture of his car sitting in the lot, and we edited it with the help of another picture of a dented car of the same model and color. And so when we had the picture ready to go, we were going to just send it to Dan and see what his reaction was when he saw his car with a dent in it. But we realized that there was more that we needed to do to make him really believe this prank. Because not only was it April Fool's Day, and this was at least our junior year, maybe even our senior year together, so we had celebrated April Fool's Day a lot in those 3 or 4 years. But it probably wasn't even the first prank that any of us had experienced that day. So to keep his suspicion level a little lower, we decided that we shouldn't be the ones to tell Dan about his car. It should be someone else from outside our friend circle that maybe Dan would trust a little bit more. So we decided the RA of our dorm would be the best person to show Dan the picture. He went and found Dan at the dining hall, and he showed him the picture that we gave him, and it worked out great. Dan believed exactly what we wanted him to, and there was a little bit of a panic in him. And frankly, he believed a little bit too much because we had to keep him from calling the cops and filing a report before he even got out to see what his car actually looked like. And so this morning, we're going to continue to talk about belief. Not just generally what to believe and to how to keep the faith, but more specifically how we respond when trials come, because those trials seek to disrupt our faith. And we need to also know what God is doing with our faith in those moments. And so this passage that we're going to look at this morning was the same one that I was planning to preach for a few weeks before we started dealing with COVID-19. Unfortunately, now I know that each one of us is going through this trial together with the entire world. And even though here in our church and community, this virus hasn't caused some of the major problems that it has in other places, we're still being impacted by it in all kinds of ways. And whenever trials like this come, our minds and hearts can be bombarded. And we need to know how to respond and seek God in those moments. So we're going to look at a familiar passage to most of us. It's John chapter 11, verses 1 through 44, and it's the story of Jesus raising Lazarus from the dead. So if you don't have a Bible, don't worry, you can pause me. I won't be offended. Go get your Bible, open it up, and then when you're ready, you can join back in. Now a man named Lazarus was ill. He was from Bethany, the village of Mary and her sister Martha. This Mary, whose brother Lazarus now lay ill, was the same one who poured perfume on the Lord and wiped his feet with her hair. So the sisters sent word to Jesus, "The one you love is ill." When he heard this, Jesus said, "This illness will not end in death. No, it is for God's glory, so that God's Son may be glorified through it." Now Jesus loved Martha and her sister and Lazarus. So when he heard that Lazarus was ill, he stayed where he was 2 more days. And then he said to his disciples, "Let us go back to Judea." "But Rabbi," they said, "a short while ago the Jews there tried to stone you, and yet you are going back?" Jesus answered, "Are there not 12 hours of daylight? Anyone who walks in the daytime will not stumble, for they see by this world's light. It is when a person walks at night that they stumble, for they have no light." After he had said this, he went on to tell them, "Our friend Lazarus has fallen asleep, but I am going to wake him up." His disciples replied, "Lord, if he sleeps, he will get better." Jesus had been speaking of his death, but his disciples thought he meant natural sleep. So then he told them plainly, "Lazarus is dead. And for your sake, I am glad I was not there, so that you may believe. But let us go to him." Then Thomas, also known as Didymus, said to the rest of the disciples, "Let us also go, that we may die with him." On his arrival, Jesus found that Lazarus had been dead in the tomb for 4 days. Now Bethany was less than 2 miles from Jerusalem, and many Jews had come to Martha and Mary to comfort them in the loss of their brother. When Martha heard that Jesus was coming, she went out to meet him, but Mary stayed home. "Lord," Martha said to Jesus, "if you had been here, my brother would not have died. But I know that even now God will give you whatever you ask." Jesus said to her, "Your brother will rise again." Martha answered, "I know he will rise again in the resurrection at the last day." Jesus said to her, "I am the resurrection and the life. The one who believes in me will live, even though they die. And whoever lives by believing in me will never die. Do you believe this?" "Yes, Lord," she replied. "I believe that you are the Messiah, the Son of God who has come into the world." After she had said this, she went back and called her sister Mary aside. "The teacher is here," she said, "and is asking for you." When Mary heard this, she got up quickly and went to him. Now Jesus had not entered the village, but was still at the place where Martha had met him. When the Jews who had been with Mary in the house comforting her noticed how quickly she got up and went out, they followed her, supposing she was going to the tomb to mourn there. When Mary reached the place where Jesus was and saw him, she fell at his feet and said, "Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died." When Jesus saw her weeping, and the Jews who had come along with her also weeping, he was deeply moved in spirit and troubled. "Where have you laid him?" he asked. "Come and see, Lord," they replied. Jesus wept. Then the Jews said, "See how he loved him?" But some of them said, "Could not he who opened the eyes of the blind man have kept this man from dying?" Jesus, once more deeply moved, came to the tomb. It was a cave with a stone laid across the entrance. "Take away the stone," he said. "But Lord," said Martha, the sister of the dead man, "by this time there's a bad odor, for he has been there 4 days." Then Jesus said, "Did I not tell you that if you believe, you will see the glory of God?" So they took away the stone. Then Jesus looked up and said, "Father, I thank you that you have heard me. I knew that you always hear me, but I said this for the benefit of the people standing here, that they may believe that you sent me." When he had said this, Jesus called in a loud voice, "Lazarus, come out." The dead man came out, his hands and feet wrapped with strips of linen, and a cloth around his face. Jesus said to them, "Take off the grave clothes and let him go." Now this story is Jesus' greatest sign of power before his own death and resurrection. And every person in the story has some claim to belief in Jesus, but they fall short in displaying wholeheartedly the faith that Jesus expects. In the same way, I can read the story and say that I believe it's true, that Jesus actually did this, but my own life can betray me when trouble comes. Trouble has a way of bringing out what our belief really looks like. And in this passage, everyone is facing some kind of trouble. So we need to look at those struggles and see what their belief looks like, and how Jesus strengthens and grows that belief even as it wavers. Because I am sure we can find ourselves falling into the same struggles they are facing at various points in our lives, but especially right now in the midst of the trial facing the entire world. The opening section of this passage focuses on Jesus and his disciples. Now, Jesus is very close to the end of his ministry at this point and preparing to go to the cross. So the disciples have been following him and hearing his teaching for a couple years. They have affirmed before that he is the Christ, the Holy One of God. And they saw miracles like turning water into wine and feeding more than 5,000 people and many others. They saw the blind, the lame, the sick, and the demon-possessed all healed. They even saw the sea and the storms calmed at his command. But still their belief is not quite enough to overcome what's taken over their hearts. What they show is the fear of being on the wrong side of Jerusalem's leaders. They fear for the life of Jesus and their own life as well. It was widely known that there were those in and around Jerusalem who wanted to see Jesus dead, and Bethany was only a short walk away. They might as well have been walking right into the lion's den. And Jesus says, "Lazarus is dead, and for your sake I am glad I was not there so that you may believe." Now I've read this passage and heard this story plenty of times, and for a long time I would think how brave and loyal the disciples are for Thomas to say, "Let us also go, that we may die with him." But all these words really show is that in their mind, this is the end. Not only for Lazarus, but for Jesus and themselves as well. What more could Jesus do to make them understand that the sickness will not end in death? Not for Lazarus, not for Jesus, and not for anybody else. But they could not see properly through the fears that they had. And toward the end of the story, we hear some of the thoughts of the Jewish mourners who had come to be with Mary and Martha. And more than anybody else in the story, they do really lack faith. And these people weren't the disciples. They hadn't followed Jesus and seen all the miracles he had done firsthand. But they didn't live under a rock either. It's clear they all knew the story of the blind man Jesus healed earlier in John's Gospel. Now, some of them probably knew who this man was. So now, as Jesus mourns the loss of his friends, the group is divided. Some see his tears and see his love for Lazarus. Others seem to imply that perhaps Jesus may not have loved him as much as his tears suggest. They know he healed the blind man, and they assume he could have healed Lazarus before he died. On paper, it sounds easier than healing a man born blind. But Jesus never showed up to help. And these Jews probably have a distrust of Jesus that is affecting their faith. He was, after all, disrupting the basic way of life for the religious leaders of Jerusalem. Anyone who is viewed in opposition to them can't be as great as everybody says, no matter what kinds of miracles he's done. So their faith is hindered by their distrust. Now, returning to the sisters of Lazarus, we not only see two new ways that their faith is disrupted, but also a different way to deal with those struggles. The disciples expressed their thoughts openly, but more in an effort to sway Jesus to give into their fears, trying to convince him to stay away from Jerusalem. And the Jews showed their lack of faith by snide remarks, designed to ridicule and hopefully bring others to doubt in Jesus as well. But Martha comes to Jesus differently. She trusted Jesus with all her heart. And when he makes it to Bethany, 4 days after Lazarus had already died, she still believed that he could have done something to prevent his death. But in the same breath, she shows some of the struggle and doubt that she's dealing with. Because Martha is uncertain of what exactly Jesus could do for her now that Lazarus is gone. Even though God will hear whatever he asks, she believed in Jesus, but she didn't have the belief to think Lazarus could come back to life that day, even after having Jesus' assurance that his illness will not end in death. That kind of miracle was unheard of. Lazarus' body was starting to become disformed and rotten. If Jesus came to Bethany to help in some way, she would take it, but she had no clue what he could possibly do at this point. Martha calls out to Jesus from her uncertainty, and he leads her toward greater faith through their amazing conversation. It has not all come together yet, even after that conversation, but Martha is starting to see the glory that Jesus spoke of, even if it is only in words. And Jesus will show her that glory even more by his power. And finally, we come to Mary. Just like her sister, she truly believed Jesus could come and save Lazarus, but he never came. She too cries out to him in her sorrow, and it's that one painful sentence she cries out through her tears. If you had been here, my brother would not have died. And that's their entire conversation. She has nothing else to say. Martha still had a little bit left in her, some faith that she was holding on to, even if it was confused and uncertain in that loss. But Mary, on the other hand, appears to show hopelessness. She trusted Jesus. He was a friend to her family and a loved friend of theirs. She didn't know why Jesus showed up now, but there's no indication that she thinks he's going to help either. Not with a body in the ground that long. She cries out to him from the depth of her sorrow, lacking any hope for a change to this situation. And Jesus hears Mary's cry and works to bring her out of the depths of her hopelessness. Jesus didn't only save Lazarus that day and bring him out of the grasp of death. When he brought Lazarus out of the tomb, he also pulled out the hearts struggling in the depths of their individual trials back to firm belief. Almost everyone there had belief, which took them from death to life. For all who believe, even though they die, they will live. It's only a small number of the Jews present who still hold on to their unbelief. All the rest, along with the disciples, Mary and Martha, saw the glory of God put on display before them so that they may believe. In the midst of this pandemic, we are dealing with something deep within our spirits that, if left to go unchecked, is going to disrupt our faith seriously. There is fear in the hearts of people around us. There is uncertainty about how this is all going to work out. And for some, especially those places and families hit hardest, there is hopelessness settling into their hearts. And right now, it seems the entire world is being pulled into the depths by the situation that surrounds us. And I hope that we are broken enough, but still have enough faith to cry out to God and just let him know the problems that are pulling at our hearts. We are in times of trial, and in those times, the forces that stand opposed to God want nothing more than to allow the trials disrupt our faith. In trial, all we can do is continually cry out to God. The Bible is full of stories of people struggling and unsure of what God is up to. And we see so many of them cry out to God in those times. Listen to these words from Psalm 130. Out of the depths I cry to you, O Lord. O Lord, hear my voice. Let your ears be attentive to my cry for mercy. And fortunately, it wasn't just words and arguments that brought Mary and Martha out of the depths. When they cried out to Christ, he heard them, and he revealed the glory of God in a powerful way right before their eyes. And when we cry out to God, one way or another, he is going to bring us out of the depths. Some blessing, some sign of hope, some miracle is going to happen. It might be big or small. It might be something worldwide or something personal that impacts each one of us individually. And that is Jesus pulling us out of the depths and calling us back into the belief that brings life to each and every one of us. Thank you for joining us this morning. We continue to pray that you all stay safe and are continually blessed and empowered by God during these tough times. And we hope to see you all again in this sanctuary some Sunday very, very soon. So God bless everybody.